I'm Scott Morrison, and this is my story. I grew up in a little town called Olivet. It's just south of Lansing, Michigan. It was the kind of town where neighbors helped each other. My mom was a public school teacher there, and my dad was a professor and basketball coach at the college. It was one of those things where, I probably placed too much higher expectations on myself with my dad being a coach. And because, they had set such a good example for me, I probably didn't handle losing all that well, especially when I had a younger brother who was probably the more accomplished basketball player. It was one of those times when I thought that I needed to perform well, always win, always get good grades. And so it was harder on myself in that regard. I had placed so much emphasis on becoming better at what I was doing that I was forgetting to give myself the license to be my own person. And had to find my own way because I had a brother who was a Division I athlete who'd gotten a scholarship, got a lot of attention for it. So I had to kind of find what was going to be my direction. It was one of those things where I realized that, I'm pretty good at helping people. So I thought that's something I could pursue. I went to Olivet College. It was one of those things where I walked out of my house and I walked across campus and went right into a dorm. It was a little bit challenging with having your father be a professor and the coach there, obviously, but it also provided all kinds of opportunities for me. When I first got out of school, that's what I did. I started substitute teaching until I could, find myself a full-time job. It was a permanent substitute position for a child residential care facility called Star Commonwealth. There was a lady who was on a maternity leave, and so I got to work with some at-risk kids and families. It was something that was a real eye-opener for me because here I was seeing kids and families that hadn't experienced anything like what I had experienced and had trouble trusting for obvious reasons. They'd been through all kinds of abuse and neglect and those kind of things. So I learned that I wasn't going to just talk my way into having those folks trust me. So I learned a lot in that regard. That led into something called a family services worker, where I was working more directly with the families. It was that kind of experience that led me down the path to helping people and realizing that I had a gift. I could go out in the world and actually have an impact. If you're in that profession and you're doing it well, it means you're really committing a lot of emotion to it. There was times when I'd gotten married, I had 3 children, and I was going home emotionally spent and realizing that I didn't have nearly as much left for my own family. I know I needed to commit to them, and so it was time to at least entertain the idea of changing a setting or a career change, that kind of thing. I talked to one of my friends who was a financial advisor at the time. And he said, you'd be a great financial advisor. And I kind of balked at the idea because I thought, no, first of all, I have no financial background. I'm not a salesman. I can't sell anything. And he asked the simple question. He just said, well, let me get this right. He said, you actually take at-risk kids and families and try to point them in the direction of a new life, one with hope, and you're pretty good at it, right? And so I didn't have a real good argument for that. And I said, okay, yeah, you've got a point. But it was obviously a risk that I took because I had been following my parents' footsteps. And to some degree, it was kind of like a defense mechanism. It wasn't really taking a new risk at doing something, that was different from what my parents did. When I decided to leave Star Commonwealth, I had $16,000 and a $25,000 stipend for 12 months. It's not a choice of whether you're going to make it. You have to make it. Your family's, counting on it. The first couple of years while I was doing this, I used my counseling as a crutch. I used it as a defense mechanism. I knew that part of the world. And so I spent a lot of time, and today we call it our discovery meeting. I asked a lot of open-ended questions. I got to know the clients and what was important to them. I'm sure, and I'm probably giving a secret away to all my clients who've known me for 25 years, but some of those first engagements were me learning as much about them because I didn't want to talk about financial products because I didn't really understand them as well as I should. I passed the tests I needed to pass, but I wasn't ready. I knew just enough to be dangerous. It was the moment where I realized that I needed to take a look in the mirror again. Was I'd had a lot of success, and then all of a sudden it just kind of peaked. It leveled off and I couldn't figure out why. It simply was because I had finally gotten to the point where I knew more about financial planning. I knew more about the products and strategies, and I started talking too much. I started anticipating what people were going to say, the questions they were going to ask. I was talking too much about product. I was talking too much about what I do, and I wasn't listening anymore. I wasn't listening to what's important in their lives. I think that was a moment when I said, you know what, you need to go back to the basics and then make sure that you're only providing solutions after you understand truly what they need. The one thing I would have told myself back then, listen to understand. rather than listen to reply. I think we've gotten into a bad habit of where listening implies that we're agreeing with people. And that's not necessarily true. Listening to someone just validates that they're relevant in the world, and that if I can understand them, I don't necessarily agree with what they're saying, but I can certainly validate, what they're saying and empathize with what they're saying. One of the last steps in the income model that we use, we call it a legacy segment. And I really, have learned to appreciate that we call it a legacy segment. We don't call it the last segment. We don't call it the death segment. We don't call it the inheritance segment. We call it the legacy segment. And so we're able to have a conversation with a client about what kind of a legacy do you want to leave? And so whatever's left in this bucket, so to speak, or this segment, is about what's most important to them. My kids and my grandkids are my legacy. All the success I've had professionally, that's all great, but my real legacy is my kids, and that's my gift to the world. And so whatever I can do to support them financially in that regard is a plus, and whatever I can do to help others to do the same makes my life very rewarding. Thank my wife, thank my family, my business partner. I don't really think I'm going to work. I have the privilege of helping people. I thank everybody who's around me that helps support that endeavor. I look forward, I know my partner continues to look at me and say, you're getting a little gray up on top. When are you going to take on retirement yourself? And I said, well, I'll let you know, but right now things are right where I want them to be.